Your empathy was never virtue, it was your leash. Now you're healed, you're dangerous. You see manipulation instantly, and you stop feeding predators with your softness. You've been lied to about what healing is. They sold you a safe definition. Softer, warmer, more understanding, more patient. A man who absorbs more and complains less. A man who communicates. A man who forgives. That version of healing isn't evolution, it's domestication. Because the world doesn't reward the man who feels deeply. It rewards the man who enforces reality. And predators, social predators, emotional predators, don't fear your feelings, they fear your standards. So let's rewrite the label in cold terms. A healed empath is not kinder. A healed empath is harder to exploit. That is the Machiavellian frame shift. Healing is not becoming harmless. Healing is becoming unavailable to manipulation. An unhealed empath is a predictable machine. High sensitivity, high guilt, high responsibility. You pick up pain that isn't yours. You over-explain, you overgive. You think understanding is power. It isn't. Understanding without consequence is leakage. It's a slow bleeding of time, energy, and dignity. It's giving people the benefit of the doubt while they use your doubt as access. So why are you no longer safe when you heal? Because your empathy stops being a doorway. Empathy used to make you negotiable. People could trigger your compassion and steer you. They could play confused, wounded, misunderstood, and you'd do the work for them. You'd translate. You'd soften. You'd excuse. You weren't stupid. You were trained to see cruelty as a misunderstanding and manipulation as pain. That training made you useful. Healing breaks that. When you heal, you start seeing patterns instead of stories. You stop asking, why are they like this? You start asking, what are they trying to get from me? That single question is lethal, because it exposes the entire game. Most miscommunication is strategy. Most guilt is a tool. Most drama is a distraction designed to keep you reacting instead of deciding. A healed empath stops reacting. He becomes cold, not emotionally dead, but emotionally disciplined. He can feel everything and still enforce the boundary. That's what makes him dangerous. Predators can handle a nice man. Predators can handle an emotional man. Predators can even handle an angry man, because anger is predictable. But they cannot handle a man who stays calm and removes access. That's the definition of no longer safe. Not safe to guilt, not safe to bait, not safe to shame, not safe to harvest, because your nervous system is no longer their remote control. Let's make the moral inversion clear. They told you empathy is virtue. In power terms, empathy is only virtue when it has teeth. If your empathy makes you tolerate disrespect, that's not goodness. That's self-erasure. If your empathy makes you keep rescuing people who harm you, that's not love. That's submission. A healed empath learns a new law. Compassion does not override standards, and the moment you live by that law, certain people will call you changed. Cold, selfish, different, good. That's the alarm system working. Because the people who benefited from your old softness will feel threatened by your new clarity. They lose their access route. They lose the ability to move you with emotion. They lose their free supply. So they redefine your healing as a problem. That's the key psychological trap. When you heal, they will try to make you feel guilty for your boundaries. They'll say, you used to be nicer. You're not the same. Who hurt you? You think you're better than everyone. All of that is propaganda designed to bring back the old you, the one they could manage. But the healed empath doesn't debate his healing. He enforces it. He understands that being safe is not the goal. Being safe is how you get consumed. You're not here to be understood, liked, or praised for your sensitivity. You're here to survive the social battlefield with your sovereignty intact. Healing is not a hug. Healing is a spine. And once you grow it, you become the one thing predators fear most, a man they can't use. Predators don't hunt strength. They hunt predictability. And unhealed empathy is one of the most predictable psychological profiles on Earth. You feel fast, you feel deep, you assume responsibility, You fear being unfair, and you'd rather carry the weight yourself than risk conflict. That isn't kindness. That's an open border. So here's the mechanism, cold and mechanical. Predators hunt empaths because empaths can be controlled through guilt, ambiguity, and emotional overload. Not through force, through leverage. A predator doesn't need to dominate you openly. Open domination creates resistance. A skilled predator wants you to choose your own submission and call it morality. They do that by exploiting 5 pressure points. Empaths often have a guilt trigger that fires even when they did nothing wrong. They feel guilty for setting boundaries, guilty for disappointing, guilty for not responding, guilty for choosing themselves. Predators weaponize that. They don't have to prove you're wrong, they just have to activate guilt and wait for you to self-correct. They'll say things like, "After everything I've done for you, I guess I'm just too much for you. Must be nice to not care. So you're abandoning me now." Those lines aren't emotional. They're surgical. Each one aims at the same target, your internal judge. Because once guilt is activated, you start negotiating against yourself. You start offering concessions without being asked. That's how you lose power without a fight. Empaths are often addicted to interpreting people in the best possible light. You assume misunderstanding over intention. You assume pain over strategy. You assume they didn't mean it. Predators love that because it creates infinite chances. Every violation becomes negotiable. Every disrespect gets relabeled as stress. Every lie becomes confusion. And while you're busy understanding them, they're busy expanding access. They don't fear your intelligence. They fear your suspicion. And your suspicion used to be muted by your compassion. Many empaths fear being seen as harsh. They avoid confrontation because confrontation feels like cruelty. They'd rather swallow resentment than be the bad guy. So predators push with small violations and watch you adapt. Adaptation is surrender that feels civilized. You call it peace, they call it permission. And once you avoid conflict once, you become a pattern. They learn. He won't enforce. He'll negotiate. Predators don't need to win every time. They need to learn your limits. And conflict avoidance makes your limits soft. Predators overwhelm you with emotion because emotion creates fog. Crisis, drama, tears, confusion, urgency. These are not accidents. They are environmental control. In fog, you can't see direction. You can't see cause and effect. You can't calculate cost. You react, you rescue, you stabilize. And once you stabilize their chaos, they own you. Because now you're responsible for keeping the peace they refuse to create. This is the victim-tyrant strategy. They appear wounded, but they control the room. Empaths fall into this because they can't tolerate distress, especially other people's distress. So they become the firefighter. Firefighters are necessary, but they are also exploitable because fire can be started on purpose. Empaths often carry a hidden belief. If something is wrong, it's my job to repair it. Predators exploit that by refusing responsibility. They drop chaos in your lap and watch you pick it up. They break the rules and watch you negotiate peace. They disrespect you and watch you work it out. The moment you take responsibility for their behavior, you become their employee. That's the mechanism in its final form. They create a problem. You solve it. They keep the benefits. And they don't even have to thank you, because your empathy will convince you that you should do it. Now the Machiavellian shift inside is this. You stop thinking, I attract toxic people. You start understanding, toxic people test everyone. They stay where they can feed. Empathy without enforcement is food. Healing is when your empathy stops being a feeding trough and becomes a filter. You still feel, but you don't sacrifice yourself to feelings. You don't confuse compassion with access. A healed empath becomes dangerous because he removes the predator's main tool, guilt-based control. No guilt means no leverage. No leverage means no access. And without access, there's no hunt. That's the mechanism. And once you see it, you stop negotiating with predators using morality. You start operating with law. When you heal, your empathy stops leaking. And the moment it stops leaking, certain people don't get sad. They get hostile. Because your healing isn't self-improvement to them. It's a supply cut. It's the end of a system that benefited them. This is pattern recognition. Who panics when you heal and what they do next. A Machiavellian strategist doesn't get surprised by behavior. He expects it based on type. Here are the primary archetypes that become unstable when you're no longer safe to exploit. This person's relationship to you was transactional but disguised as closeness. They took your time, your attention, your labor, your listening, your forgiveness, and they paid you back with neediness, entitlement, or occasional affection, just enough to keep you supplying. When you heal, you stop overgiving. You stop rescuing. You start saying no without justification. The parasite's panic looks like sudden emergencies, dramatic suffering, guilt lines. I guess I have nobody. Anger when you don't respond fast. Their fear isn't losing you. It's losing the free resource you were. Tell, they don't respect your boundary. They try to bypass it. This archetype doesn't dominate with fists. They dominate with perception. They need to be seen as the victim, the misunderstood one, the good person. They use subtle contempt, passive aggression, and moral framing to keep you off balance. Empaths are perfect targets because you'll keep trying to understand them and repair the bond. When you heal, you stop chasing clarity. You start observing patterns. You stop reacting emotionally. You stop explaining yourself. The covert narcissist panics because they can't control you through confusion anymore. Their response. Gaslighting escalates. That never happened. They rewrite your intentions. You're doing this to punish me. They recruit allies to validate their version. Tell. They talk about your tone instead of their behavior. This archetype uses pain as power. They are always struggling, always fragile, always in crisis. And because you're empathic, you feel compelled to stabilize them. But stabilization becomes your cage. When you heal, you stop being their emotional medic. You stop responding to every flare-up. You refuse responsibility for their storms. They panic because their main weapon, distress, no longer moves you. Their response, escalating crises, self-pity as pressure threats. If you leave, I'll fall apart. Blame, look what you're doing to me. Tell, their pain becomes louder when your boundary becomes firmer. This archetype buys access with warmth. They flatter you, idealize you, make you feel special, then slowly increase demands. They don't want partnership. They want compliance, but they package it as romance or friendship. Empaths fall for this because it feels like genuine connection until the cost rises. When you heal, you stop confusing chemistry with character. You stop being impressed by words. You start requiring consistency. The charm merchant panics because their spell doesn't work on a man who measures actions. Their response. Love bombing returns, suddenly dramatic apologies with no change. You've changed. As an accusation, quick replacement to regain control. Tell. They offer intensity, not stability. This archetype controls you with virtue language. They don't say, do what I want. They say, if you cared, you would. A real friend wouldn't. After all I sacrificed, they weaponize your self-image. They make your boundaries feel like betrayal. When you heal, you stop letting your identity be defined by their expectations. You stop proving you're good. They panic because they lose the leash. Their response, shame campaigns, character attacks. You're selfish now, public framing. He's cold, he changed. Tell. They attack your identity, not your choices. This one smiles but undermines. They benefited from you being soft because it kept you non-threatening. When you heal, you become harder to manipulate and harder to outshine. They don't confront you, they erode you. Their response, subtle distancing, concern that's actually poisoning. I'm worried about him. Quiet alliances against you, withholding support when you set standards. Tell. They disappear when you become strong. The people who panic at your healing are the people who were living off your unhealed version. Your healing is a filter. It doesn't just improve you, it reveals who was attached to your weakness. And this is why a healed empath is no longer safe. Not because he's cruel, because he stops being easy. Healing isn't accepted, it's challenged. Because when you heal, you don't just become calmer, you become unavailable. And unavailability is the one thing manipulators interpret as aggression. They don't see your boundaries as self-respect. They see them as rebellion. So the moment you stop being safe, the counterattacks begin. Not always loud, often surgical. Designed to pull you back into the old role, the fixer, the forgiver, the absorber. Here's the brutal rule of human nature. People who benefited from your weakness will call your strength cruel. That's the first weapon. Moral inversion. They take your healing and frame it as damage. You're cold now. You've changed. You're selfish. You think you're better than us. This isn't feedback. It's a leash made of shame, because shame is the empath's pressure point. If they can make you feel like a bad person for having standards, they regain control without needing force. And most men fall for it. They rush to clarify. They over-explain. They apologize for their boundaries. They return to the cage and call it peace. A Machiavellian lens doesn't negotiate with shame. It identifies it as a control tactic. Now let's map the counterattacks you should expect when you heal, because healing changes the power equation and power changes behavior. When your old guilt reflex stops working automatically, they increase intensity. The guilt trap becomes dramatic, so you're abandoning me. After all I did, you're just like everyone else. I guess I don't matter. This is not emotion. It's attempted command. They're trying to reactivate your internal judge, so you punish yourself for their discomfort. Your healing threatens their comfort, so they try to make you responsible for it. That's the trap, making your sovereignty feel like cruelty. When guilt fails, they create urgency, a sudden emergency, a breakdown, a catastrophe considered too serious to ignore. They know you used to respond to distress like an alarm, so they ring it. Crisis bait is designed to bypass your boundaries by making the situation morally special. And once you respond, the lesson is installed. He still comes when I pull this lever. That's why the healed empath must learn a ruthless principle. Not every crisis is real. Some crises are keys. The response isn't heartlessness. It's discipline. You verify, you keep distance. You don't become the firefighter for fires you didn't start. When they can't control you privately, they try to control how others see you publicly. They'll paint your boundaries as abuse. He's manipulative. He ghosted me. He's unstable. He's narcissistic now. He's having a breakdown. This is how predators recruit a crowd. They weaponize your silence and turn it into a story, because a crowd creates pressure. Pressure breaks boundaries. And once you break your own boundary to defend yourself, they win. They made you react. Machiavellian move. Don't argue with the narrative. Outlast it. A sovereign doesn't chase reputation. He protects behavior. The truth eventually exposes inconsistent storytellers. This one is subtle and poisonous. They don't accuse you directly. They act worried. I'm just concerned about him. He's not himself. I hope he's okay. It sounds kind. It's not. It's a way to frame you as unstable while pretending to care. It makes others approach you like you're fragile, broken, or dangerous, without the attacker looking like an attacker. This is reputation warfare with a smile. When threats fail, they offer warmth, sudden kindness, apologies, affection, promises. I've changed. This is not necessarily love. It's often a re-entry strategy. Predators don't always attack with claws. Sometimes they attack with honey. They're trying to reopen access long enough to restore the old pattern. Then they'll slowly bring contempt and entitlement back. That's why healing requires a new rule. Consistency over intensity. You judge by pattern, not performance. If they can't pull you back, they punish you by withholding approval, attention, inclusion, opportunities. They want you to feel social pain for choosing sovereignty. They want your nervous system to associate boundaries with loss. This is how groups domesticate men, reward obedience, punish independence. And that's the deepest threat. Healing makes you a problem for systems built on your compliance. When you heal, you enter conflict with the people and environments that fed on your old self. They won't celebrate your growth. They'll test it, shame it, remind you of who you used to be. You don't need to hate them. You need to see them clearly. Because once you see the counterattacks as tactics, not personal drama, you stop bleeding energy into defense. You become calm, selective, and unreachable. That is why a healed empath is no longer safe. Your problem was never empathy. Your problem was unpriced empathy. You gave it away like water, hoping it would buy loyalty, fairness, or peace. But in a power world, free resources attract parasites. That's not cynicism, that's economics. So the strategic shift is simple. Keep your empathy, remove their access. This is empathy with teeth, the Machiavellian version, not warm, not cruel, just disciplined. You feel everything, and you still enforce standards like law. Here's the behavioral protocol. Empaths get trapped because they accept stories. Predators live inside stories. Trauma stories, victim stories, misunderstanding stories. Stories delay consequence. So your new move is verification. What did they do? How often? What changed after you addressed it? Do actions match words? If it's inconsistent, you treat it as strategy, not confusion. You can understand someone's pain and still refuse their behavior. That's adulthood. Anything else is slavery. An unhealed empath sets boundaries like a question. Is it okay if? I don't want to be rude, but please understand. That language is permission-seeking. It invites negotiation. A healed empath sets boundaries like policy. That doesn't work for me. Not doing that. Stop. If it happens again, I'm out. No speech, no explanation, no emotional pleading, because boundaries are not a debate. They're a line on a map, cross it, and the terrain changes. Predators are not afraid of your words. They're afraid of your behavior shift. If someone violates a standard, the response is immediate and proportionate. Remove attention, reduce access, end the interaction, withdraw help, formalize the relationship. The key is speed. Delay turns enforcement into drama. Speed turns enforcement into identity. Your nervous system must learn violation and its consequence automatically. That's how you become unsafe to manipulate. Manipulators bait you because emotion makes you predictable. If they can get you angry, guilty, or pleading, they can steer you. So you train one response, calm, not soft calm, predatory calm, short replies, slow cadence, flat tone, minimal words. You do not match energy. You deny energy. You become a wall, nothing to grab, nothing to push. A man who is emotionally neutral under provocation is a nightmare to control. Empaths often operate like public utilities, always on, always available, always reachable. That creates entitlement. So you price your availability. Slower responses, fewer explanations, selective engagement, no last-minute rescues, no emergency access. For habitual chaos, scarcity isn't a trick. It's a signal that your life is governed, and governed men are respected. This is the heart of it. The rescuer reflex must die. Predators create messes because someone always cleans them, often you. You used to absorb their chaos to keep the peace. That taught them they can behave badly without paying. Now you let consequences educate them. If they're late, you leave. If they disrespect, you exit. If they lie, you remove access. If they guilt, you go silent, not as revenge, as law. Empathy makes you sentimental. But I know their good side. A strategist doesn't build trust from good sides. He builds trust from patterns. So you start selecting people based on consistency, accountability, respect, under stress, behavior, after boundaries. Anyone can be kind when it's easy. The only people worth keeping are those who stay respectful when they don't get what they want. That's the filter. You're not trying to be less empathic. You're trying to be less exploitable. Because empathy without teeth is an invitation to predators. But empathy with teeth becomes a weapon. It sees through manipulation. It enforces consequences. It withdraws access without guilt. It selects ruthlessly. That's why a healed empath is no longer safe. Not because he lost his heart, because he stopped letting his heart be used as a hostage. The most dangerous lie you ever believed was this: if I'm understanding enough, people will become good. That lie created your prison. Because the rescuer identity doesn't just make you kind, it makes you available to exploitation. It trains you to absorb what other men would refuse. It trains you to confuse tolerance with strength. It trains you to feel responsible for problems you didn't create. And predators don't fear rescuers. They farm them. The identity death, not a mindset tweak, a replacement. You kill the rescuer because the rescuer is the version of you that can be controlled with suffering. This is how the rescuer pattern slowly forms. You see someone in distress, and you feel a genuine urge to help. It feels natural to step in and try to fix what's hurting them. Over time, that urge to help makes it easier to push your own boundaries aside. You tell yourself it's temporary, that it's the right thing to do. But when your boundaries keep disappearing, something subtle happens. The other person learns, without anyone saying it out loud, that your needs can wait. And when your needs are always last, respect slowly erodes. What began as care quietly turns into something colder. Contempt doesn't arrive suddenly. It becomes normal. That's the pipeline. The rescuer is not a noble man. The rescuer is a man who can't tolerate guilt. He will pay any price to avoid feeling like the villain. And that price is usually himself. So the first identity death is this: your goodness has been used against you because it's not goodness. It's a dependency. A dependency on being seen as fair. A dependency on being liked. A dependency on being needed. Predators use that dependency like a remote control. They shame you, guilt you, accuse you, and you rush to restore your good person image. That's not morality. That's psychological capture. The replacement identity understands your self-image is not a bargaining chip. You don't prove you're good by tolerating disrespect. You prove you're sovereign by enforcing standards. Rescuers often wear pride as armor. I'm strong, I can take it. I don't want drama. I'm not like them. But what you call strength is often just high tolerance for exploitation. The truth is colder. Every time you handle it, you train others to hand you more. That's how the rescuer becomes the dumping ground. So the replacement identity refuses the role of emotional landfill. You stop absorbing chaos that isn't yours. Over-responsibility is the rescuer's religion. You take accountability for other people's moods, outcomes, conflicts, and failures. You negotiate peace between people who enjoy war. You fix what you didn't break. This is where the Machiavellian lens becomes law. You are responsible for your choices, not their dysfunction. When they create fires, you don't run in automatically. You let them feel heat. Heat educates faster than speeches. Saving is emotional. Selecting is strategic. Saving says, I will invest even if you prove unworthy. Selecting says, I invest only after you prove worthy. The rescuer gives first and hopes behavior improves. The sovereign demands behavior first, then grants access. That is the replacement identity, the filter. You become the man who observes patterns and makes decisions without guilt. You don't reward chaos with attention. You don't reward disrespect with presence. You don't reward manipulation with second chances. You select. Rescuers crave closure because closure feels moral. They want the final talk, the final explanation, the peaceful ending, the mutual understanding. Predators use this hunger like a hook. They keep you in endless conversations, half apologies, half promises, recycled excuses, because conversation delays consequences. The replacement identity doesn't need closure. He needs outcomes. He understands closure is often just a way to keep access. So you stop seeking the final conversation. You act. You remove access. You let silence be the ending. This is the new identity. You still feel. But you don't fuse. You still care. But you don't sacrifice. You still understand. But you don't excuse. You become the sovereign observer, calm, selective, consequence-based. You treat behavior like data. You treat manipulation like warfare. You treat your time like territory. And this is why a healed empath becomes unsafe. Because the rescuer was safe. The rescuer could be guilted. The rescuer could be pressured. The rescuer could be exploited. But the sovereign observer, he doesn't negotiate with suffering. He doesn't worship being needed. He doesn't save people who keep choosing to drown. He watches, selects, and walks away cold. That's the identity replacement. Here's the final warning: your healing isn't permanent. Not because you're weak, because the world will keep testing the old version of you. And the moment you return to softness without structure, you rebuild the cage with your own hands. Predators don't need you broken. They just need you inconsistent, because inconsistency is negotiability. Negotiability is access, and access is the only thing they ever wanted. So understand the trap. When you heal, you become hard to manipulate. That forces manipulators to change tactics. They stop attacking you directly and start inviting you back. Not into love, into the old role. They will offer warmth, apologies, vulnerability. I've changed. They will perform accountability just long enough for you to relax. Then, once you're back in position, once you're reachable again, contempt returns. Entitlement returns. The same violations return, but now with a new twist. They punish you for ever having boundaries, because your boundaries threaten their control. They didn't forget that. They store it. So if you re-enter softly, if you start explaining again, rescuing again, tolerating again, they don't interpret it as compassion. They interpret it as surrender. And surrender always gets upgraded into domination. The three relapse signals, if you want to know whether you're about to recreate the cage, watch for these relapse signals in yourself. You start justifying their behavior again. You return to they didn't mean it, and they're under stress. That's not empathy, that's self-betrayal in polite language. You start over-communicating, long messages, detailed explanations, trying to be understood. That is the old addiction, trading clarity for approval. You start rescuing their emotions. You feel their discomfort and rush to ease it. You absorb their tension so they don't have to carry it. That's the rescuer identity resurfacing. Those three signals mean one thing: you're about to reopen your borders. And once your borders reopen, the old predators return, sometimes in the same bodies, sometimes in new ones. Because what predators hunt is not a person, it's a pattern. Re-entry must cost them. If someone had access to your unhealed version, they don't get access to your healed version for free. Access must coldly cost something. Consistent respect over time, accountability without performance, behavioral proof. Not emotional speeches, acceptance of your new standards without complaint if they push back against your standards. If they call you cold, selfish, arrogant, that is disqualification. A man who respects you doesn't argue with your boundaries. He adjusts. That's selection. Some people only loved your weakness. This is the part most men refuse to accept because it stings. Some people didn't love you. They loved your availability. They loved your guilt. They loved your overgiving. They loved that you could be pressured into staying. When you heal, their love evaporates. And that's not tragedy. That's exposure. A healed empath becomes unsafe because he forces truth to surface. He forces relationships to reveal what they were actually built on: respect or extraction. You must prefer loneliness over captivity. Healing without this standard is cosmetic. If you fear being alone more than being exploited, you will always return to the cage. You will accept disrespect just to keep connection. You will trade sovereignty for warmth. That trade is what predators count on. A Machiavellian mind chooses the harder path: solitude with control over connection with submission. Because once you can be alone without collapsing, you become unbuyable. No guilt can move you. No smear can trap you. No crisis can command you. That is what no longer safe really means. If you understand this, don't comment feelings. Comment proof. The next time someone tries to guilt you back into the old role, do one thing: withdraw access. No speech, no anger, no explanation, just distance. If you're ready to live as a healed empath, meaning a man with empathy and enforcement, write one word in the comments: unsafe, not as drama, as doctrine. Because the world doesn't fear the empath who feels. It fears the empath who finally learned to choose himself, coldly, consistently, and without regret.